Okay, folks, we'll get started again. Welcome to our final session. Delighted to kick off with Theresa Lynn from School of Education and Social Work. And she's going to be telling us about creative processes for engaged regeneration planning. So I think this will kind of link quite nicely to some of the things that we've already heard. So Theresa, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. So, make sure you can see me. Yes, it's quite difficult to know where to begin because so much of what I'm looking at connects so much to everything that's been said today. So I'm quite happy if those who have been before me put their hand up and say, I see a connection there, and I say, you know, there's so much I could say, and there'll be stuff I have to skip because there's just so much of it. My background is that I have 30 years plus in community engaged art. So it's about engaging people with their own places, their own knowledge, their own cultures, their own environment, and creating contexts where people take control and take they empower themselves. You can't give people power, but people can take it. And it's the idea that people have faith in what they know and what they understand, and connecting to all of these things that are going on in the city. I love the public art and the V&A and DCA and the idea of the Eden Project and all of these things. I adore them. And my position is to maintain that connection between these big public international things and our greatest resource, which is the people who live here. And making those connections and maintaining them means people will go with those changes and those regenerations, rather than being left behind, unconnected and unable to tap into them. And this idea, of is the city a good place to live? Well, yes, it is, but people have to create that feeling in their own communities. You can't regenerate or renew to people. They do it themselves. They have to engage. So that's what this is about. The elements of a successful environmental regeneration process, and the things I'm talking about are environmental because those are the sources I have most easily to use, and because it gives me real physical things I can show you. I could get so broad about regeneration that there would be nothing to hook it to, so I'm using examples, but please take these as examples that have wider implications. So the elements of a successful process in the minds of those who initiate them in terms of local authorities, bodies of that kind, is to renew and restore place and the use of space. And there's always an immediate project intention and a long-term one. What the cumulative impact of that long-term intention is, and can it create momentum in the city, in the people, in the environment, in the moving forward together. And that it should be responsive to needs and desires of whoever the relevant community are. That might be a very local community, it might be the whole city, it might be the whole country. But as I say, these layers have to be connected. You can't do one without the other. And it has to all be within budget and what the wider plans are. So that's your context. Who gets involved in it? Community members, community organisations, voluntary sector, community engaged artists who bridge traditionally between the communities and those who deliver the services, the city planners, engineers, landscape architects, the professionals who engage with the environment, those who physically build the environment too. So I'm looking at an outdoor environment context and looking at how do you work across disciplines. This is a tiny project which can serve as an example for bigger and bigger scale. This was a tiny play area where we got raw bricks. The child in the image at the top is actually rolling a shape of probably a plant into the top of a raw brick. We took them back and had them fired, and then they were laid in the play area, and they are still there. And this is a very old project. This is, like a 25-year-old. No, not how long were we? Getting on for 20 years, I suppose now, this project. But it's still the same idea that what is relevant to the people in the place can they have their hands somehow on it, or at least use their judgment to inform it? You have to work with those who do the designing of the project, the engineers who enable it, and the people who physically build it. And then when you work with the community, there's always a bridge to the community people you work with. In this case, it was children's workers in a local playgroup. So it was a playgroup, 100 feet away, maybe 150 feet away from the play area. Those children made these bricks, so it's so locked in. And that is a real good example of the idea that local people have to be really, really attached to what you do. And then the material suppliers, the people who are trying just to earn a living by selling stuff, have to be engaged with you. They've got to want to do it. You can imagine the extra trouble it was to send us a pallet of raw bricks. We rolled it into them and then we took them back. Now, they were paid to do that, and it was a tiny part of the budget for the whole play area, which was a really good thing. But they had to be willing. They had to say it's worth our while, we can be bothered, you know. So that's, and they have to have a commitment to those ideas too. So you adopt processes to maintain these engagements. This wall that you see in the image was made in one day at a single event, but it was local school children and local people who created this wall. And it was part of a bigger event, which I have an image of later. But it was also the culmination of visits with the young people to local environments, to the law, to the allotments, to the Miley, which is, some of you will know, is the old railway line that used to run right through Dundee. They took photographs, they discussed it, they came back, they designed installations for the spaces, they designed physically built little models of seating. We did everything we could to get responses and engagement. And this wall was then those young people hosting an event for their wider community to discuss the environment. So it's not layering. You don't just do one thing. You build it, you have momentum, you move forward. You elicit responses from local knowledge. And that's such a precious thing that if you ask someone, what do you think about the place you live? They'll go, it's okay. You know, you have to actually engage and create a process to get those stuff that's in the back of your mind out and through your mouth. And that's how you engage. And that's why creative process is important. And I use art as creative process, but any really good community engaged worker is a creative worker. It is a creative process to get that engagement happening. So an example of a process that, keep an eye on my time, of a process that isn't initiated by arts, but often ends up using it is what is known as a charrette, where people who are involved in urban planning can set up on site for a few days or a week in a place they want to work in, and they will engage with the community, and it's quick and it's fast and it's intense, and we'll take this back and redraw them and bring them back tomorrow. And there's that speed and fast and that people seeing that what they say one day appears in the plans the next. That, you know, that is an engaged creative process. You don't have to be using art for it to be a creative idea, but you can, and sometimes it helps these kind of engagements much, you know, to get somewhere. What's the purpose of the engagement? I've got a little list, but the purpose is to create place very often. But that's the visible purpose. The kind of invisible purpose is to feed energy into community engagement with each other. Dialogue among people, between them, with agencies. It's about creating that possession of power over your own environment. That's the point. This is a play area which came out of a series of events, but the point was that people engaged with the space. The purpose is, so then, you know, support involvement. I have some slides here which have a lot of writing on them. I'm not going to read them all out. It's as much for you to say, this is the kind of information that's available that you can think about if you're going to engage. I don't expect you to memorize it. There's no test at the end. But you can talk to me about these things. And if anything you're doing would require these, come and see me. So, you know, the communication of ideas from agencies to people and in the other direction, intergeneration, intercultural, between interface. It's all about interface, the whole thing. You use you use people's knowledge of the environment to allow their engagement, and that's a creative process. You encourage the use of environment, and you engage people with their regeneration processes. How do you do it? This image that you see right at the back of this image, you see the kind of black paper on the wall. That's the image you saw earlier with all the stickers on it and all the writing. This is the space set up for those young people to engage their community. We'd set it up that day, and this is before everybody arrived, and engaged with all the different things the young people had done. It was always about, what can you add to it? How can you feedback? What do you think? So it was a really powerful method. So you work in cooperation with all of these agencies and statutory and voluntary agencies with the purpose of engaging. You run activity sessions, workshops, you do creative consultation by writing, walking, talking, taking photos. Every way you can get stuff out of people, you use. You directly relate it to planning and design processes, which means that you can get funding very often, which is really important. You link it to celebration, to promotional events for ideas, and it has to go on over time. And you have to have awareness of the planning processes that should be the context that should be driven by your engagement process, preferably not the other way around, but there's certainly a dialogue. And what are the outcomes? Well, the image tells you that even the youngest, these are, I think, 3 and 4 year olds in the nursery, painting the designs that they created with our community artists themselves. They're actually painting, you can see the staff sent them out with gloves and masks, and because it was masonry paint, so we didn't want it in eyes, and they sent them out in batches of 3 and 4, but they painted the damn thing themselves. And they had created designs. There was a whole wall of designs inside, and the artist who'd worked with them had gone and said, "Oh, it was torn paper and making things and working with colours." Would actually do what happens at art college, which is, "Oh, that's good," and the artist would put it up and stand back with the child and say, "What do you think?" That's what they do at art college, and it's the same respect. So it's about respect for what people do. I loved that process. I thought it was wonderful. So you learn from experience. Everybody develops skills and knowledge. There's mutual exchange at the heart of the methodology, which is people talk as they work. When you engage with people, you have to listen as well, even when you're doing a physical art activity, because that's the point. It releases the tongue. You know that thing of when somebody draws and they go, there's actually a theory that that's how we released our tongue as humans, because we stood up and used our hands, and there's a connection between fine motor skills and your tongue. So to work is to release your tongue in some ways. And then you carry on feeding back into communication. It's over time. It's not a one-off ever. You use the information to engage properly through your planning processes and your agencies and your voluntary sector. And it allows these opportunities to be developed and publicised through channels, and it's part of the bigger community cycle. There are annual cycles in communities that the people who live there know. Listen to them, talk to them, engage. And then the context for all this, and how do we do this? Is inclusivity, often through local authorities, equal opportunities, but you do partnership work between all of the different projects and agencies that you're engaged with. You saw the little list of who do you engage with. You have to get the people that make the stuff and the people that design it and that have decided this is going to, everybody's got to be on board. It just doesn't happen because the communities will know they're not being listened to. And partnership working in, you want to engage with developments in wider areas, so it keeps going out and out and out. So a local community will engage over the whole city and over the whole of Scotland, and And the longer term impact. Regeneration engagement sits within a wider potential for transformative practice. It's subversive, which is, in my book, a really good thing. People possess their own knowledge of the collective potential they have for societal change. And we're sitting in a pandemic, in climate change, in Brexit, and, you know, people have opinions and people don't always have the tools to express what they think. This process, creative process, releases that. So I consider it to be a really powerful thing. So thank you very much.
That's okay. Quite all right, indeed, yes.
If anyone's interested in coming to see, there's an exhibition on the subject of my talk, plus lots of artworks that are kind of related to that. Got some flyers for you. Desk at the front. Feel free to take one.
So delighted to welcome Dr. Keith Williams from English and the School of Humanities. And as Keith has just said, this is sort of tying into what's going on with the Being Human Festival. And we're going to be looking at this lovely title, The Ghost of Futures Past. So Keith,
Thanks. If you can take this off, of course. It's temporarily. That's great. So yes, my talk's called The Ghost of Futures Past. And there's a good reason for that, because we're in the process of resurrecting the lost Scottish father of transatlantic science fiction. So he literally is the ghost of futures past, as it were. This is Cooper-born Robert Duncan Milne, lived from 1844 to 1899, so he didn't quite see the 20th century that he helped to dream up. Milne was an astonishingly prescient pioneer. He published some 90 stories and articles, mostly in San Francisco's Argonaut magazine in the 1880s and 1890s. And at the science fiction program here, we're developing a major research project, including a PhD thesis, a new critical anthology, and hopefully too, a graphic novel retelling Milne's stories in visual form, to show how Milne is the missing link between Scotland and the origins of modern science fiction. His contribution to the early genre is arguably greater than anyone else in the Scottish literary canon, including Stevenson and Conan Doyle. And yet his legacy has disappeared into oblivion. Milne drew on the work of 19th century Scottish physicists and inventors, such as James Clerk Maxwell and Alexander Graham Bell. He's the third Beatle, if you like, between the physicists and the technologists. We also have Milne, who exercises this extraordinary kind of scientific imagination. So he's drawing on the work of physicists and inventors such as James Clerk Maxwell and Alexander Graham Bell into the possibilities of new electromagnetic forces and the kinds of communications media that they enabled. And Milne used this to imagine technologies for overcoming global distances in time and space. That may partly have been because he was a Scot in exile on the other side of the world, in the most remote place you could really imagine at that time. Milne also wrote very presciently about visual time traveling as a form of cinematic experience, a decade and a half before H.G. Wells did. So in texts like The Paleoscopic Camera from 1881 and The Idoloscope, he creates a kind of virtual time traveling experience through a sort of visual invention on the page. He also foresaw forms of, what we take for granted now as telepresencing, video conferencing, teleportation, and so on, in stories such as Professor Vare's electrical experiment from 1885, remote surveillance in the aerial cone reflector from 1881, mobile phones and worldwide satellite communications in stories such as The Great Electrical Diaphragm from 1879, not to mention climate change and other kinds of catastrophes in stories like The World's Last Cataclysm. He also wrote about scientific terrorism and drone warfare in a two-part story called A Question of Reciprocity from 1891, which actually features a kind of helicopter drone that blackmails San Francisco. He wrote about cryogenics in a story called 10,000 Years in Ice from 1889. He wrote about molecular re-engineering in A New Palingenesis from 1883. He also wrote on other subjects such as alien life forms, A Peep at the Planets, scientific immortality, The Man Who Could Not Die, identity theft and personality exchange in stories like A Modern Proteus and Brain Transference. The repertoire just goes on and on. He also wrote about lost worlds and the rediscovery of extinct species, the hatching of the iguanodon, and indeed even a future after books, a future after his own kind of, his own medium had passed away, the passing of the printing press from 1898, which anticipates a kind of Xerox machine-like multiple instantaneous printing. Now, sorry, I've lost the slide control there. Science fiction historian Sam Moskowitz actually credited Milne as America's first full-time science fiction writer and placed him at the heart of a West Coast movement, including Ambrose Bierce and later Jack London. And Milne was also more prolific than Eastern pioneers such as Edward Page Mitchell or Brander Matthews. Early American science fiction is very bi-coastal, as they say. Milne's ideas, as subsequently realized by engineers and technologists, have fundamentally shaped the networked, online, media-driven world we now live in. The Milne story that presaged Wells's visualization of time travel as a kind of cinematic experience is one of his most remarkable. And this is what it would have looked like in those very close columns of a late 19th century popular magazine. This is the paleoscopic camera. To give it its full title, it reads How Dead Walls Reveal the Scenes and Secrets of the Past. So everything is recorded in this story, in impressions laid down in a type of light. And indeed, it's a fictional take on one of San Francisco's other most famous citizens, the pioneering photographer, Edward Muybridge. Muybridge's animal locomotion studies used the camera as a machine to see movements too fast for the naked eye and reanimated them by projection, inspiring the invention of the cinematograph in 1895 by the Lumieres. The character at the center of the paleoscopic camera is actually called Milbank, which is the name of a street in Cooper, by the way. But he's recognizably a kind of version of Edward Muybridge. You can just tell from the sort of flamboyance and the kind of the character of the photographer in the story. Now, Milne sees the idea that photography can reveal things otherwise invisible in time, and reimagined Muybridge's process as a fantastic technology that can unearth events from the remote past and replay them as moving images in the present. So he anticipated cinema as a medium for visual time traveling years before Wells or the Lumieres. As Milne's journalist narrator describes, and he's watching, he's watching time, as it were, being recovered in the form of moving images through this paleoscopic camera device. Scene succeeded scene with such exact and wondrous alternation of form and subject that my attention was spellbound, and I scarcely knew whether I was gazing at reality or not. This is really virtual stuff, as it were. And it's also in colour. Colour, form, expression of countenance, habitude of dress, demeanour, gesture, all were there, limned to the life. So this is an extraordinary description, as it were, of seeing the past resurrected in the form of moving images. And Milne wrote several stories which do that. And there's a counterpart one, which I'll talk about in a moment if I have time. Now, Milne was widely read in the US and also syndicated in other parts of the world, although rarely, if ever, in his native Scotland for some reason. His cryogenic story, 10,000 Years in Ice, in which a survivor from an ancient advanced civilization is revived in the present, unintentionally became one of science fiction's great literary hoaxes. And this was because of the documentary plausibility which became Milne's trademark style. I mean, he was a reporter before he was, he was a journalist before he was a writer of fiction, as it were. So he always used a kind of eyewitness documentary style that was hyper-plausible. And indeed, readers of a Hungarian newspaper mistook the translation for a factual report. And there are surviving letters, where people are asking for the next, to know what happened in the next stage of this cryogenics narrative. Took it as real, basically, as a scientific account. So I think that Milne isn't just anticipating things like time travel, which we credit H.G. Wells with innovating. He's also anticipating the realism of the fantastic that we associate with Wells texts like The War of the Worlds. And of course, this is the famous 1938 radio adaptation, which notoriously panicked listeners in America by transferring such documentary techniques into broadcast media themselves. Though generally enthralled by scientific wonders, Milne's narrators, like Wells's after him, are not simply gung-ho optimists about technological progress. They're not just positivists, as it were. They often sound cautionary notes about the double-edged potential of new inventions or processes to disrupt human life or to be turned to sinister ends. In the Idoloscope from 1890, for example, Milne discusses the possibility of being able to replay any action or event from the past on a kind of monitor. So the Idoloscope raises questions about universal surveillance and an end to privacy altogether. Similarly, in a question of reciprocity, Milne foresees unmanned aircraft steered by remote control, steered electrically at a distance, as it were. He signals how destructive this might be in the wrong hands when a helicopter armed with bombs is used to blackmail San Francisco by a foreign power. Indeed, throughout his writing, Milne created countless imaginary technologies. Some were close to feasibility at the time, others way ahead. Ironically, scientific modernity itself cut Milne's own career short. A lifelong, high-functioning alcoholic, nothing Scottish about that, of course, his life was finally terminated just shy of the 20th century on the 15th of December, 1899, when he stumbled in front of one of San Francisco's new electric streetcars. And this is a still from a film that's been restored of, the early streetcar system functioning in San Francisco. It's called a trip up Market Street. It's a phantom ride, which is very common at that time. But it actually goes past the very place where Milne himself was run over by one of these things. Thereafter, Milne's reputation was virtually buried with him. He never gathered his work together into a published volume in his lifetime. It never came out in book form. And no one thought to do so until Moskowitz's relatively limited selection in 1980, which has also become a rarity. There are only 11 stories in it anyway. So I think the time has come to honour this transatlantic prophet in his own homeland. Milne should be one of the first writers we think of when we consider Scotland's science fiction heritage. Until then, his country is perhaps doing a great disservice, doing itself a great disservice, not to mention the man himself, as it were. So we're really just at the beginning of this process. And this year's Dundee Being Human programme on the theme of renewal, as well as the holding of a Robert Duncan Milne takeover day in Cooper Corn Exchange tomorrow, is one of the first kind of stages in, resurrecting the ghost of futures past, as it were. And you're all warmly invited to Cooper tomorrow if you're anywhere in the vicinity. The exhibition's open from 9 o'clock in the morning until 6, and then there's a film screening in the evening and a talk about Milne's work as well. So thank you very much for listening, folks. I hope I didn't gallop through that too quickly.
Thanks, Matthew. That was really interesting. So Delighted to introduce our final speaker, Hussam Al-Weir, who teaches in architecture and urban planning, which I'm delighted to say is now back under the aegis of Duncan Johnson College of Art and Design, where it first started. And this kind of, in a way, really sums up the various different themes that we've been looking at. Obviously, a lot of our speakers have talked about this idea of developing a sense of place and of regenerated communities and so on. And Hussam is going to be talking about that, and particularly about the idea of these 20-minute neighbourhoods. So, hand over to you.
Thanks for the invite. I know it is late afternoon, so apologies. Now, I really enjoyed all the talks actually before, and I hope this could be, in a way or another, a summary to bring most of them on board, if I may say, because I believe in the integrated approach. Now, I am from architecture background, planning with big hat on sustainability. So that's interdisciplinary approach. Found it useful, although I have to admit it put me under a huge pressure, because suddenly now I lost my identity. Am I in School of Social Science? Am I in DigiCAD, in law? So anyway, still I am trying to find my way, I could say. I'm going to show you, although I am an academic, but everything I do is hands-on. So what you're going to see is kind of a summary of what I have done as part of the Urban Lab and Urban Living with Dundee City Council. And also, my work with the Scottish Government in Charette program and participatory placemaking. So this will be, you could say, findings from it. I was keen to show you something from Perth and Dundee City. Then I thought it's better if I show the summary. But I promise if it is of interest, we'll show you then what we've been up to with Dundee City. Because at the moment we are working on 6 sites: Broughty Ferry, Lynn Lassen, Whitfield. Oh my goodness, the very north one, I can't remember now, Albert Street, Hilltown, and Dundee City Centre as a 20 minutes neighborhood. Now, so there is a lot of talk at the moment about neighborhoods. This is just with whom I've been working. Let me just go straight to the point now. I would be more than happy to send you that part. That's the work we did with Perth and did Dundee City Council, and recently even with Damascus. Where do we belong when everything's in the move? That's, to me, is very important statement. Legislations, technology, climate crisis, injustice, health injustice. Today is a priority for sure, especially now with pandemic and post-pandemic and economic recovery. But medium, long term, who cares? Who is responsible? The other questions. Whom does the future belong to? That's another interesting one. The future to me belongs to a very different kind of person with a different kind of mind and different way of thinking. Creators, artists, urbanists, and emphasizers, that's quite important. Patterns recognizers and meaning makers. We need to be analytical, yes, but empathetic. Place sensitive, creative, but rational. Listening, but leading. This really requires new dialogue, new interpretation, and advocacy skills. Actually, this requires a whole new mind, a whole brain, place-making mind, if I may say. Yes, this is lovely. We know the SDGs. But what does that mean on local background, on local neighborhood? What does that mean for those who live in Lochee or for those who live in Albert Street? Seriously, what does that mean? Okay, number 11 is crucial. Yeah, but excuse me, guys, number 11 wouldn't work without in an area like Lochee. Number 11 wouldn't work without reducing inequality, without good health and well-being, without climate actions. So we need to have this kind of breaking silos. Silo busting is key if we are serious about climate crisis, health and well-being. No brainer. We need number 17. Community needs to be a real partners in this game. We need to have the top-down working equally with the bottom-up, actually. Hence, I like it. It is a partnerships if we are serious about achieving them. No, of course, we need to start thinking about how do we control the inputs coming to the cities, but equally the outputs. If we are serious about achieving a city of what I call it a net positive cities, so how we need to start thinking about how to get the fundamental right and starting with what exists. That's quite important. So the intersections between region, cities, neighborhoods, public spaces, houses becoming fundamental to me. That's integrations and intersections, especially the what I call it, coordination between the wider region of Dundee, for example, and beyond. The pandemic show us clearly the lens. Oh, sorry, I just need to show you this movie. So the pandemic itself was a clear lens to us that more than ever, more than any time, we are in control of our time. Hence, some people start working earlier, having lunch for 2 hours, finish maybe later. So we are now, how can I say, in charge of time. And that's give us the opportunity to explore locality. Access to green park, access to public spaces, local shops. But this only happened in affluent neighborhood. It only happened in affluent neighborhood. And it wasn't the case in deprived area where people feel more, how can I say, there is injustice on them in terms of quality of accessibility to green park or shops and so on. So more than ever, we start enjoying this locality and we have this feeling of neighborliness. We lost the neighborliness element, neighborliness. And this is why the concept of 20 minutes neighborhood came on board in terms of how do we access local services, facilities, amenities, schools, green park within 5, 10 or 15 minutes. Let us not get obsessed about whether it is 10 or 15. To me, it is a new way of living, a new way of living. And this is, to me, should be the way forward if we are serious about reducing our carbon footprint. Rather than using the car on daily basis, at least to buy milk or bread. No, I'm not advocating let us get off the car. That's very aspirational and may take 40, 50 years from now. But we need to start taking seriously, how do we reduce the car dependency? How to encourage more active travel, active transport, and those all healthier means. So absolutely, we need to start softening our cities. You can't talk about neighborhood without referring to the city itself, because city to me must be a city of connected neighborhood, a city of short distances. A soft city is the answers in terms of how do we live with the weather, how do we live locally, and how do we get about and getting on. This is a nice example how we design cities in general in the UK, in Europe. There is two trends. The left-hand side, wow, focus on the center, put all the resources and the money in the center. If the center flourish, everywhere else will flourish. I am not disputing that. That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. But sorry guys, yes, Dundee is not an attractive place because if you want to see the reality of Dundee, go to Albert Street, go to the Hill Town, go to Lochie, where people lost face on what we do. Dundee city, nice city for those who can afford to live on it. Okay, but if you want to see the reality, if you want to see the drugs issues, please go and smell the drugs. You could smell it everywhere without being very negative, by the way. But there is a reality to be faced. Dundee city is not only about waterfront. It's not only about the city center. That's what should be Dundee city. A city of connected, vibrant neighborhoods. This is what they do in Germany. If you want to see this example, go please and visit Freiburg in Germany. A city of connected, vibrant neighborhoods. We're not creating competition between the center and others. The center must be distinct. And Dundee city center is distinct. But this is what should be the city, because by doing so, you make, how can I say, equal distribution to the resources. So there is equity here to be understood. And also you empower neighborhood and you empower local citizens. To do so, we need to move from centralized system to decentralized system, where community has a role to play. But within this, you make the distance shorter. You make the distance shorter and you invest in local economy, local neighborhood, local own economy. And that's not new, my friend. That's not new. Broughty Ferry has got its own distinct economy. Lochi, 100 years ago, it used to have its own distinct economy. And this is the problem. We keep repeating the same mistakes, and we keep delivering these suburban houses, which is all about car and car orientations. No sense of a place, no identity. It's all about, everything looks the same. In fact, if I am drunk at 10 o'clock, I don't know whether this is my house or this is my house. Everything just looks the same. Everything's just centralized around car. The problem with this kind of model, the only way for transportation is car, even if you are desperate for a milk in the morning. But the problem with it leads to poor accessibility, isolation, decline in public health, congestions, and even no participation. This is what we do in the UK. It could be anywhere, by the way. But I don't want to be very negative. Europe is the same, and some Middle East the same. And I love this quote. People live in houses, but where do houses live? For God's sake, guys, 60% of the structure here is to do with car movability. Mm-hmm. We have lost that urban structure of public spaces, public realm, the concept of lot, and so on. The system isn't broken. It was built this way, and a lot of people could tell you that. So what is a neighborhood? Neighborhood is not a place. It is a state of mind in which our hearts are open, we connect with others, and we care about others. Evolution is not always positive. This is the problem. We move from fine-tuning small details into big. Everything's become about big. Everything's about distance. So we move from this very sophisticated, integrated urban structure to more monofunctional, facilitated by car and car use. And that's what it led to disconnections. Everything's become big, large. And we lost this kind of harmony. Just to give you an example how we do things in the UK versus the one in Netherlands. In Netherlands, they still focus on the blot principle. If this is a site in the UK, you deal with this like this. The same site in Netherlands, you use the concept of a blot, which was very famous in English and the Scottish history. You deal with it in this concept of small is beautiful, low is beautiful. This module is adaptable. Why? Because it's so easy to adapt those, or sometimes even to change functions. This one is quite hard to change. It's not flexible. It's not adaptable. City like Aarhus now, taking this quite seriously. How to make our city a connected neighborhood. Investing around key nodes, the nodes concept, public transportation, making home for everyone, work for everyone, mobility for everyone, amenities for everyone. This is Freiburg, the early sketch of Freiburg city. How to make it a distinct historical center, but also connected neighborhoods. Of course, for that to work, 15 minutes neighborhood is not only about transportation. It's not only about transportation. It's about the livability of that place in terms of access to quality services, health, cars, parks, ATM machine. We keep closing down ATM machines. People don't have access to cash now in some of those areas. It's all about more local choices, like Bears Road, like Broughty Ferry, walkable, cyclable, but also you need to have a mixing of density, mixing people. And this is about reducing our carbon and keeping the identity. But remember, people don't change behavior when you tell them to. It's not about, oh, we're going to give people in Dundee 2 cycle routes. No, people change when the contexts combine them to, making it connected, safe, affordable, cheap. And this neighborhood should be made by everyone and should be for everyone. This is all about promoting sharing, knowledge sharing, local knowledge. It's all about unbacking and constructing of land and unlocking underutilized land and facilities. It's about regenerative of the future, sharing frameworks, learning. I will be very brief. This is just my students at the moment. They're trying to measure the performance of the 20 minutes neighborhood. And this is one of their results, measuring the performance between Broughty Ferry and Lillasen. But there is no one-size-fits approach. Concept you use and shape how you think and plan. It's about 3 B's, I call them. The place, people, and participation. It's not about a place in the physical things, but also it's about health, well-being, jobs creations. And over time, it may involve different stakeholders. I will be very brief. This is, for example, Atlanta. Wow, footprint in the United States, driven by car. It's covered around 7,700 kilometers square. They reduce around 7 million tons of CO2 a year. And this is Barcelona. The same population, 5 million. It only covers 650 kilometers square. Wow, they produce only 1 million tons of CO2. This is compact, livable, and this is all driven by car. This is Bears. Wow, I think you will like this one. This is Bears in 1860 with 30,000 inhabitants. Yes? This is Bears in 1900 with less population, and look at the sprawl. 1930, only 34,000. 1950, look at the sprawl. 1970, we still the same population. We move. The flat used to accommodate 7 or 8 people. That's overcrowded, by the way. And now the average is only 1.5. 1.5. This is 1980, and this is 2020. Look at the sprawl. Bears within 150 years only increased by 15,000. Look at the size. Look at the footprint we occupy on the land. We need to start taking this idea of integrations and compact seriously in terms of living locally, working locally, entertaining locally. We need to start considering densifying our suburbia and rural areas. But also we need to consider this idea of really shifting from gray to green, making green, as my colleague said, visible. It's not about grass. Grass is not green. How do we use and utilize green is important. How to make it edible. In Europe now, they start considering a very important rule. 300. Every citizen must have access to 3 trees from window. Every neighborhood must be covered by 30% of tree covers, and every citizen must have access to a green park within 300. But for this to work, we need to start looking at local economy, which is not based on big commercial economy. Why in this country everything has to be big? Local economy, when everything's based on local economy, local growing, local food, local restaurants, that's lead to adaptations and resilience. Look at Brotiferi. It has been adaptable despite the pandemic and despite all the challenges. But also this is about human sensing. This is about having ice cream. This is about everyday culture, health, and quality of life. Neighborhood to me is accumulation of plans layering of how we shape the physical in order to shape the perceptions and shape decisions. Recently, Utrecht, they propose a very aspirational studies. They put forward something called Utrecht barcode. Utrecht barcode. It's a smart way to understand what has worked in a neighborhood and what hasn't worked. How do we make most of what we have underground, on the ground, and above the ground when it's come to sustainable neighborhood? But hey ho, we need this kind of mediation, the relationship between the top down and bottom up. We can't leave everything on the hand of the community. Why? Community does not have sometimes the resources or the power. You need to facilitate the two. We need to establish the two, because the top down has got the money, has got the power, has got the law and the legislations. And all of us are responsible. It's like a jigsaw, my colleagues. We all come to it from different perspectives and from different angles. But our places are messy. They are messy, and we need to acknowledge it is messy. So the importance of mess is quite important. And our engagement is messy, and collaboration is messy. and difficult, but it needs collective endeavor, need passion, relationships, and helping each other. And my final headlines, it will take 2 to 3 generations to establish sustainable neighborhoods. It is an iterative process where a lot of learning may happen. It is a multifaceted approach. It's not about the physical, but about the place making. It needs bottom up and top down. It needs building trust and common purpose between team members and local communities. To me, it is an opportunity to think and act differently, because the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten. The greatest danger is not that we aim too high and miss, but that we aim too low and reach it. And the final things I will say, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Thank you.
So much, Sam. Amazing, thought-provoking and inspiring, and yeah, great way to end our event. So we've obviously looked at historical rebirth, so we've been thinking about how we can kind of renew and regenerate our communities and ourselves in the future. So really hope that you've enjoyed the event. It's been fantastic to have you all here in person. Thank you so much for coming, and fingers crossed we'll be able to do more real things in the future. So thank you all very much.